I wanted to have a sample app that all the guys in the company are following that had HTML, that are showing the new HTML markup, not the old one, the observables, dependency injection, security, and plenty more. So it's got lots of things in there. So announcing that we have shipped our new one called Enterprise Music Store UI Angular 2. Okay, and that has a backend which is an ASP.NET 4.6. Well, sorry, a .NET 4.6, ASP.NET 5, which it could be MVC 6. Anyway, so that's the back end of that, and so it's basically just consuming REST services. All right, so how do you use this? Just go up to GitHub and go there and follow the quick start. You follow the quick start, you press F5, and you're good to go. Right? Wrong. Okay, that's not how it works. Okay. So just be aware, you've got to follow this quick start. Things in the new world are a little bit more complicated. You've got to pull it down, and then you've got to run this setup bat to set up the environment and get all your dependencies and npm and stuff, and run a build.bat and run.bat. So that's what's there. Now, let me just take you through just a couple of things that the sample project has that we should be calling out. All right, so look at these are the new Angular 2 features. It has HTML markup, observables, dependency injection, and security. So let's walk through that. HTML markup in Angular 1 had a lot of differences from Angular 2. So there was data binding, attributes, events, and templates, and I'll just walk you through that. Angular 1 had this double curly brace thing for data binding. Mustache. And it had the binding attributes using ng dash. Okay, so you've got some object here, and if the object doesn't exist, we want you to hide the card or something here. And if this user will hide the register button. Anyway, so that's kind of how they've done the binding there. We also had events. So the events in Angular 1 did ng-click, and you'd call this, or ng-click, and we're calling a register method. We also, back in Angular 1, if we wanted to kind of, what are we doing here? Populating some drop-down list, we're going genre in genres. That was using an ng-repeat. Okay, so that's how we did these type of things. Now the big problem with all this was everything in Angular was two-way, okay? And what's the name of the life cycle type thing?
The digest cycle?
Yeah, the digest cycle. So it became, there was plenty of blogs on there talking about the digest cycle and the performance problems that people were having when they got massive Angular projects, especially on mobile devices. So all I want you to understand is a lot of people had problems. And then you start comparing in those massive projects Angular versus React, and this is kind of plain JavaScript. Ignore the white, just look at these two. So you can see that just with the rendering, Angular was half the speed of React. If we're talking about syncing changes, it gets even worse, and potentially 3 times faster in React than in Angular. So that's a big pain in the neck. So, and of course, that's why people started talking about React a bit. So let's talk about how that same stuff is done in Angular 2. This familiar data binding is there, but then we have we'll let you sit there, but you've got to ask questions. That's the question spot. So Dave, you've got to ask a lot of questions, right? So here we have this square brackets now instead of that ng dash. And that's how it's done in Angular 2, and you can see you're building up some route here. And you've got these other square brackets here hidden. This is stuff that is this is a screenshot from the sample project. So you can see that hidden, it's hiding if the user object is null or something, and it's hiding the register, the link, if that, that's kind of how all the binding is being done there. So also, we talked about Angular 1 binding for events, and now we're not seeing ng dash, you're now seeing the round bracket. So we've seen the squiggly brackets, we've seen the square brackets, and then we've seen the round brackets. So there you can see this event here as well. Alrighty, so this is how you do the template binding. So in this case, we're populating that drop-down list, and I might call something out. See how this is genre of genres? What's different about this than the one before? The hash and the in. That will give you a weird error message when you do in, like you've been doing in Angular 1. And from reports in the office, several people have wasted close to an hour just trying to find that out because it's very unclear from the error message. And actually Ben was speaking to us last night. He also whinged about the same thing, and he's over in Belgium. So it's getting everyone. So just be aware that we're using *ng. I still hate why they chose ng. I think it should be ang. But anyway, ng. Do you know why they chose ng instead of ang? Less to type. And apparently it sounds like Angular. Does ng sound like Angular to you? I don't. It doesn't to me, but. Angular. I don't get it. Anyway, so be aware of that in and the of. So anybody who likes this new markup? 1, 2. Who doesn't like the markup and they like the old stuff? Yeah, most. So I think what you'll like when I first saw this, I thought, well, it kind of looks cleaner than all the NGs everywhere, and you can differentiate between all the different bindings now with you know what an event is and what a property. So that's kind of nice. But I never recall anybody in our office saying, "Gee, it'd be good to be able to differentiate them." But I guess now you get used to it, you'll like it. So look, the first time you see it right now, you're going to be cold on it. Once you got used to it, you'll be fine. So let's talk about the second issue that's in the sample app. That's Angular 1 used to use promises, and that took people a long time to get their head around. And I know Duncan and Steve and others spend a lot of time trying to teach people how to use promises, and now you don't need to know it. You just use observables. All right, let's talk about that. So we have these promises where you kind of use this dot then, and you can, what are we doing here? Getting a user and then creating something. So that's kind of how that. Did anybody love promises? So we've got a couple of lovers. All right, cool. So let's talk about observables. Observables, you can do things like .get. So you can chain things together, but check this retry out. You can try to get something in retime 5 times. Trying to do that in Angular 1 would have been super hard. Did you ever do it, Duncan? Did you ever try to implement some retry logic? No. So that stuff was, well, I don't even know anybody that did bother doing it. Obviously, it would have been a real workaround or a hack. Did you ever do it, Stephen? No?
Is there a .wait for in it?
So not that I'm familiar with.
You've got to retry and have some sort of longer delay.
Yeah, look, I'm sure there's hacks out there to do it, but gee, this is quite tidy, isn't it?
Yeah,
anyway, so here is Angular 2. You can see that we're using an observable here. We've got this $sign. So if you remember C# 6, we now have the ability to do string interpolation. And that allows you to kind of punch a hole in a string. So you get a string that's more readable than using the old plus concatenating things. So it's a much more readable thing. And they've kind of got the same type of thing here coming from ES6. And so that's kind of nice. And here we've got a response coming. So we're posting something off to so the web API. It's coming back. And at this point, you know, this is kind of like a promise. There's nothing's executing here. I guess a bit like a link statement. You know, you build up the link statement, you choose when to execute it. So that's that. We've got dependency injection in there too. In the old days, we had dependency injection in Angular 1 done like this, and you can see straight away you got strings. So you've got potential fragile code there, and in Angular 2 we have this kind of like an attribute, this decorator at the top. So we've got this injectable, and that would then inject down here and strongly typed. So you're not going to have the pain that you potentially could have back in Angular 1. So these are all nice things, and the new sample has all this stuff in it. In fact, I've got this from it. So dependency injection, so obviously there's no more magic strings, it's just the decorator. So let's talk about security. What does Angular 2 say about security? Well, Angular 2 says we don't deal with that, you write your own, okay? Troy Hunt will probably tell you that's a bad idea. In our sample, we are using Auth0, and Auth0 is a third-party provider, and it has an authentication sample on GitHub, and it's an implementation of that. That might change over time, but that's how it is at the moment. So, any questions on that? If you do have questions, you'll have to come up here. Julian?
Why did you choose Auth0?
Why did we choose Auth0? Let me tell you, there's been many debates back and forth. I'll let Duncan come up and give that answer because he was one of the guys that was strongest on his opinions on this.
That's going to be my question.
Yes.
Because we were writing it for ASP.NET 5, they had not decided whether or not they were going to give out-of-the-box support for tokens and authentication, so none of that was ready, and we wanted to do it with ASP.NET 5. So we wanted to avoid the whole topic, so we used Auth0 as the service.
But it's clearly, it wasn't a lay down misere vote in the company, and that's just where we're at. That's why I said it's potentially going to change. We'll see what happens.
I think it's good that Angular doesn't have it.
You have to speak into that thing.
I think it's a good thing that Angular 2 doesn't support security
Yep.
because security is evolving, and if you try to put that into a target on a framework, there's a lot of framework stuff you'd have to change to sort of keep up with the latest security
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, they could have provided a default one.
I don't need a mic.
No, but for the camera.
Oh, for the camera. So pretend to talk in the mic.
No, turn
Oh,
around.
turn around, okay. Can I talk to this camera? So one of the this has been a real backwards and forwards discussion amongst the devs about what we should implement. And the answer is there's lots of different ways to do authentication, and depending on your project requirements, we weren't going to get it right for lots of people's projects because of their requirements. So we thought, Auth0 is very easy to put in, it minimally affects the rest of the starter, and it's very easy to pull out. So once you decide what you do want to use, we haven't made, Auth0 is not the whole way through the app. So it's an easy kickstart. It's free if you're doing a startup or a test project, it's free for up to 7,000 users. So it's great for people wanting to come in and check it out, pull it out, and then put in whatever you need for your actual real project.
All right.
All the way. Just a quick question on that.
Yes, Justin.
So I like Auth0. I like Auth0. I was just wondering, because you've built this as an enterprise app, and is that using a third-party service? No, you got to.
But don't forget, in our enterprise apps, that's the security part is often dictated to us.
That requires you to have an off-premise dependency. So if that's down, you're down? No?
Well, let's just say you're talking about a real enterprise.
Yes.
They usually have some AD, some large thing that's a showstopper, and you have to use that. If you look at Microsoft, how they're doing it, everything is tied into their live ID stuff, and we have a lot of pain based on how but that's how it works.
So I think to answer your question, no, we wouldn't. If we were going out to build something for Westpac or a big bank or a massive organisation, we're obviously not going to use Auth0 there. I think so we definitely wouldn't use it there, but I think it's their security.
If you're doing a SaaS app, web app,
if you're doing
that's
it. So it was more of it's an enterprise sample in all the things we've tried to implement, but the security we've put in an easy implementation that definitely wouldn't be used in a large enterprise.
It depends if you need claims-based auth or some other form.
And we didn't want to dictate that to everyone because it's different
And
for
I
every
think that's
scenario.
why Angular has also sidestepped the issue.
Yeah, that's good.
We don't want to do it because we're not going to get it right for everyone.
All right, so let me wrap that up. In resources, go to angular.io. If we have a whole series of rules to better Angular 1 and rules to better Angular 2, and they're consistent with the sample. We have these two projects we've just talked about, the Enterprise Music Store. It's got a UI and a backend. You can also come to Fire Bootcamp if you want to do that for 9 weeks and go through that in detail. You probably won't want to. And I guess the other thing I'll call out is this is the simplest one to get going on the sample app. It's a 2-day course. Steve-O and Duncan have already done it in Sydney, Brisbane, Canberra, and they are going to do it in Melbourne, sorry. And we actually sold it out. So obviously Angular 2 is very popular already, and they're going to do another.
And we said that was very valuable.
Oh, thank you, Greg. All right, awesome. So there we go. It's a 2-day course. Thank you very much.